have a program. It is called History and Fiction with Tariq Ali. I'm Juditha Olmacher. I am the advisor for communications and student affairs here at ULAB. I'm just going to tell you very briefly, for some of those of you who are new here to ULAB, a little bit about us. We're actually one of the youngest private universities in Bangladesh, but we have rapidly gained a reputation for academic rigor, our creativity, and our integrity. We have a unique curriculum that is based on liberal arts, which believes that an education actually must form an entire human being, not just a scholar. That there should be a balance between theory and practical education. We believe our students should be analytical thinkers. We believe that they should have a sense of service to the community and to the country, and that they should have a lifelong love of learning. So today's welcome address will be given by the Vice President of the ULAB Board of Trustees, Dr. Qazi Anis Ahmed, who is also an author, an analyst, and a publisher of the newest English language newspaper, the Dhaka Tribune. And his novel, The World in My Hands, will be coming out this December by Random House India. So please welcome Dr. Qazi Anis Ahmed to the podium.
Thank you, Juditha. Dear guests, honored guest Tariq Ali and ULAB Vice Chancellor, Board of Trustees, students, other members of the audience. Welcome to ULAB. Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure for us to be able to host this talk with Mr. Tariq Ali. I will keep my comments extremely brief because I know that we are all really eagerly waiting to hear the guest of honor speak. But I do want to say that we feel tremendously proud to be able to bring Tariq Ali to Bangladesh. We feel grateful that he agreed to come, and in particular to bring him today to ULAB. It is a great honor for us to be able to honor a great friend of Bangladesh. People who are much older than me will know this from their memory. The rest of us know it from hearing it from our elders or from reading. He was among He was, in 1971, I think you were based in London, but he was among the voices of the Pakistani intelligentsia who were very vocally critical of the genocide that happened and what was going on. And in other ways, ever since, he has remained a friend of Bangladesh. But he has also remained a friend of the oppressed or the disenfranchised everywhere. Someone can take care of this? Okay, sorry about that. He has been remained a friend of the oppressed or the disenfranchised throughout the world, first through his activism in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and also both then and beyond with his writing, through his columns, through his essays, through his nonfiction. And he has continued that role long after it became, quote, unfashionable. Since the fall of the Berlin Wall, there was a real reorientation of thoughts, and Mr. Tariq Ali has continued to occupy a very interesting position. On the one hand, we have seen that some people from the left were unable to cope with the changes that came about and insisted on a version of socialism or of left thoughts that were not practicable or had not proved successful, and others abandoned it completely. During the 3 days of the Hay Festival, one of the things that Mr. Tariq Ali said that really resonated with me was that the effect that the fall of the Soviet Union has had on the First World. I come from a generation that was really formed and shaped right at I think in second year of university when the Berlin Wall fell. So I come from a generation which is very friendly to the idea of enterprise, enterprise-led growth and all that. But that also doesn't mean that the only option is a harsh capitalism that has no compassion and no room for anything else. Mr. Tariq Ali said that during the 60 years of the Cold War, we saw a humanizing effect in the First World. In America, in Europe, there was a sense that we needed to find social policies that would keep things viable, that would keep income gaps or other issues at least manageable. Ever since the fall of the Berlin Wall, there has been an acceleration in the abandonment of such concerns, even from a pragmatic point of view, let alone from an ethical or compassionate point of view. And once I heard that, I kind of felt Mr. Tariq Ali has gallantly sort of been shouldering the burden that was on the entire Soviet Union on his shoulders for the last 22 years. He is doing with his single-handed writing what once was done by an entire imperial apparatus. Luckily for him, luckily for us, the burden wasn't entirely all alone on him, but I think he has very much been a prominent and unapologetic figure of certain kinds of statements and arguments that were at times very unpopular. And what I have personally always enjoyed as a reader of him is that he has managed to take a position that comes from a place of conscience, but then also filter it through reason and make it credible and persuasive. So with that, and I've also always been a fan of his fiction, which always doesn't get that much attention, especially his series of what might be called an Islamic Renaissance. The Shadow of a Pomegranate Tree remains a particular favorite, and I'm badgering him to let us translate it. So with that, it's my immense honor to welcome this great speaker, great man, to share his thoughts with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Tariq Ali. Thank you.
Thanks for the kind words, Anis. I can promise you one thing, that I have absolutely no idea that I've been shouldering the burdens of the Soviet Union for the last 20 years. Though it is true that the collapse of that world has created a new world, a world of transition in which we still don't know where we are going or how it's going to end up. The picture will be clearer in the next 20, 25 years' time, when some of us will be gone, but your generation will be very much there. So let me start by saying what collapsed was not just the Berlin Wall. What collapsed was any idea of an alternative to capitalism. And that is what has created a situation globally where political parties of center-left and center-right disagree on some things, but as far as the basic principles and fundamentals of society are concerned, they have no real differences. And this creates a problem for the functioning of democracy. Anis mentioned something I'd said earlier this week, which is that during the years of the Cold War, capitalism was far more expansive, far more broad-minded. The newspapers and the media permitted a great deal of dissent. Voices not usually heard now were heard in those times in the American media, in the European media. And the reason for this was to show the Soviet Union that we are better than you because you've got a one-party state. You've got a monopoly of information. You do not allow other parties to function. You do not permit dissent. We do. And that was true. It was an accurate estimate. And I think that was one of the things that finally brought that system down. Apart from the economic implosion caused by extravagant defense spending. That also helped. But it was the political structures. And the reason for that is very simple. If you set up, however utopian your aims, if you set up a state which effectively is a one-party state, it damages you right from the beginning because you have no voices to tell you where you're going wrong. Whether you agree or not with those voices is something else. But in order to function properly, you need voices to challenge you constantly, because that is the way in which society gets better or should get better. And the Russians, for a variety of reasons, one was, of course, contingent, that 22 foreign countries had invaded them to try and defeat the revolution, developed this mentality, permanent siege mentality, and maintained it even when it was no longer necessary. It then became a norm. And this norm affected the parties of the communist world, whether Maoist or pro-Moscow, all over the world. That style of functioning was repeated. And that style of functioning within communist parties was that the Secretary General of the party was the dominant figure, and whatever he or she said went. And if you challenged this view, you could be kicked out of the party, even in small, piddling little countries where the communist parties had no hope ever of coming to power. They operated in this way. And the result we see before us. So I've been extremely critical of this mode of functioning long before the Soviet Union fell, because many of us felt that if they carried on like this, they would collapse. And we hoped that there would be reforms in that part of the world, political reforms, which would really lift them up and create a much better society in which not everything was owned by the state, but you had a heavy presence of the state nonetheless for basic essentials, food, health, education, shelter, water. These should be, by advanced societies, be provided free or relatively free or very cheaply for the bulk of the population. And so with the collapse of these states, that good idea of providing citizens, their citizens, with some basic care and a social infrastructure, that went out of the window as well. And this is the problem that we confront in today's world. That till then, even in the capitalist world, or most of it, it had been accepted that there were certain areas of social provision, certain domains that were protected and that couldn't be entered by the market. Certainly true in virtually all of Western Europe, and to a certain extent even in the United States, though not in the field of health. But it was just taken for granted. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, the gloves came off and capitalism reverted to a tooth and claw mode. That the market was now, we were told, the only way forward, not one of the ways, the only way forward, and that the state had no role to play. And in this situation, parties like social democratic parties in Europe collapsed as well, or their ideologies collapsed, which is why, if you look at Britain, there's a continuum from Margaret Thatcher to Tony Blair to Cameron. There's no big difference between them, or the policies that they implemented. Greed became recognized as something that was not such a bad thing after all, individual greed. And people were encouraged to think that anyone could become a billionaire. I mean, well, this was ridiculous because, you know, the resources are always limited. But this was the idea people were given of the American dream of the 50s, that if you work well, you can become a millionaire. Not that this happened in the United States either, but people were given this impression. And this is something which dominates consciousness today in large parts of the world, because people live largely, with certain exceptions, for themselves. They don't think about the community as a whole. And the results, by and large, are disastrous, really. I mean, if you look at countries which have developed phenomenally, China,